Hi there, I'm Eitan and welcome to WiX Fixer. Today I'll be showing you how to display data from a collection on your Wix website with no code at all. So let's get started. Okay, so in front of us we have the collection that we created in the last video. And this was just created using some mock data from a random mock data website. And what we're going to try and do now is display this information on our website. And the typical way that you would do that is using a repeater. Repeaters are basically a element that, as in their name, they repeat. So if you're not connected to data, each element will just be exactly the same in terms of the elements that it contains. But as soon as we connect a repeater to data, we can populate it so that each item in the repeater is populated by a item inside of our collection. And the way that we do that is we go over here to the left to Content Manager, and then we have the option to add content elements. And I'm going to click on that, and we can add a data set. And a data set is essentially a portal, you can think of it, through which you link your collection to your website. And this data set can be linked to an element so that the element contains data from the data set. It doesn't have to be a repeater. A repeater is just a very classic example. It could also be any element on your website, or almost any element on your website. So first thing you're going to want to do is configure your data set, because you can see that here it says unconfigured and you have this little orange exclamation point on top. So I'm going to click on that and I'm going to click on settings. And once we open settings, I get to choose the collection I want to connect this to. And I'm going to connect it to collection example, which is the example collection that I just showed you in the beginning of the video. And I can rename this. I'm just going to rename it example dataset. Okay. And it's important to rename things and name things that are clear to you. Read only, so that's the mode, and you can choose between three different modes: read only, write only, and read and write. So read only means I'm only displaying content from the collection on my website, but I don't need to add or change content in the collection. Write only means I'm only going to be adding new content to the data set, the collection. And read and write means I want to both see the data in the collection and be able to change it or add to it. Okay, and it's very important to choose the right one, because this adds another layer of protection beyond the permissions that we talked about in the last video. And the permissions that we talked about last video when setting up the collection are stronger than these permissions. So if a person can't read this data set or can't write to this data set, even if you set the mode here to write, it doesn't mean that that person will be able to write. It only means that it's possible to write if they have the permissions. So for example, read only will be just a list of information that you want to present. Write only would be, let's say, a form that you want somebody to submit. And read and write would be a person's profile where you're both displaying the information and giving them the option to change it, for example. And there are other examples. I'm just trying to make it a little more tangible. Number of items to display. So this is especially relevant if you're connecting your data to a repeater, because if you have more than one item in your data set, in your collection, then based on the amount of items you choose to display, that is how many items will be displayed in the repeater. So here you only see 3 items in the repeater, but if I connect my data set to this repeater and I have more than 12 items in my collection, then this repeater will have 12 items on the live site, and you'll see that soon. I'm not going to change the number of items to display. Filters allow you to decide how you want to present the data in the repeater, and if you want to display only specific data. And the way you add a filter is by clicking here and adding a filter. And you can filter by many different factors. Okay, so you click on a certain field. Okay, so let's say I say their first name is, and then I can enter a value here, and then only items where the first name is equal 100% to that value where will be displayed in this repeater, and I'll show you more about that soon. And sort would be the order in which you want items to be displayed. So filter and sort will be more clear once you actually see how the data looks in the repeater. So I'm going to go over here and I am going to connect my repeater to this data set now that we have the data set set up. So I'm going to click on the repeater and I'm going to click on a specific item in the repeater. And then you can see here on the right, we have this squiggly line with two dots, and that is connect to data. And this will basically allow us to connect this repeater to a specific data set. And I'm going to click here, and you can see here that we have the example data set that I set up. So I'm going to click that. And then here we have the option to connect the background item. And you can see here already that now I have 12 items here in the repeater, but they all still say just name. And I actually want this name to be the first name of the person from the dataset. So in order to do that, I need to click the squiggly line for this specific text box and click connect to repeater. And you can see I'm connected to the right dataset, but the text is not connected to anything yet. And I want to connect that to first name. And as soon as I do that, you'll see that these names will change to the first names of the people from the dataset, but only the first 12 people. Okay, and we'll talk soon about how we can see more people from the dataset. So let's add a few more fields to our dataset. So I'm going to add another text element. And let's just add a paragraph. And let's call this one city. And then as soon as I drag this and attach it to one of the items, then you'll see it appears in all the items. And then I can connect that to data as well. And that's already connected to example dataset. And I want to connect this to city new. And now you should see that all of these change to my different cities. Okay, so that is how you create a data set and how you link a repeater to a data set. Now let's try and dive deeper and see a few more things that you would want to do with this repeater and data set. So first, let's show you filters. So if you go into settings and filters, so I'm going to add a filter, and the filter I'm going to say is first name contains the letter E, okay? And I'm going to add that filter. And now you'll see that only first names that contain the letter E will be appearing on my website. And in order to see the filter work, let's go into preview mode. Okay, and you can see here that only names with the letter E are included in, sorry, a letter E in the first name are included in my repeater, even though these might not be the first 12 items in my collection. And let's go back to the editor, and I'm going to show you another way that you can do this with user input. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add an input. And then I'm going to go back to my data set. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete my previous filter and add a new filter. And this time my filter will be conditioned on a user input element. So I'm going to choose, okay, so the user input element can only be a drop down. And this is one of the caveats of using no code for repeaters. And this is a situation where you might want to use code. For example, if you want to be able to filter a data set based on a regular input, then this would be something that would need a code solution. But you can filter using a dropdown. So let's go ahead and add a dropdown input to our website. And in terms of choices, I'm just going to go ahead and add multiple choices. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to add Rupert, and I'm going to add, I don't know how you pronounce that. And that's basically these two items here. And then I'm going to link the filter that I created to this drop-down menu. So I'm going to say add filter, first name contains user input element, drop-down. And I only have one drop-down here, but if I had multiple drop-downs, I would be able to pick one of the drop-downs and add filter. And now, if we preview our website, so you'll see at first no filter is active because I haven't selected anything in the dropdown. But then as soon as I pick Rupert, then only people with the name Rupert are displayed. Okay, so out of my 1,000 items in the collection, only these two have first name of Rupert. And if I change to Mjolf, I'm not surprised that there's only one person. Okay, so that is how you would filter a collection using a dropdown in a no-code environment. Another thing that we have here is sort. So if we go here to settings and then go down to sort, so I can add a sort and I can choose a field, for example, first name. And since it's a text field, it knows that to give me the option of A to Z and Z to A. If I was to choose another field that is, for example, created date, then it knows to do it by old to new or new to old. So let's do it for first name, A to Z. So now our items should all be in alphabetical order when I go to preview, and even before I go to preview. So you'll see here that now all of our items are sorted. Next, we will talk about pagination. So basically here we've decided to only display 12 items, and that is because if we were to display 50 items here or 100 items here, it would take a very long time to load and there would be very bad user experience, especially if we had images or something like that in the collection. So this is where another part of data sets and collections comes in that's actually very important, and that is linking buttons to a data set. So I'm going to go ahead and add a button to my website, and it doesn't really matter which button it is. Just say button, and I'm going to put that button right over here on top. And now you can see here that buttons also have this squiggly line for connect to data. And when I connect a button to a data set, it gives actions. Okay, so I can choose from different actions that this will do to the data set. So I can load more, which means it'll show the next 12 items in addition. I can do next page, which will mean these 12 items will be replaced by the next 12 items. I can do next item, previous page, previous items, and I can also use this to submit. But because this is a read-only data set, I don't have submit. But if I was to go over here and change this to a read and write data set, then you'll see here that my button, which I want to link to the example data set, has the option to submit. And when I click submit, basically what it'll do is it'll add any inputs that I have that are linked to specific fields to the data set. So for example, if I was to connect this drop down and I connect it to, so because this is being used in a filter, I can't use this to submit to the data set. So let's remove this from my filters. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to delete the filter. And now you'll see that I can link this to the data set, and I can link this to a specific value. So for example, I can link it to first name, okay? And then if I was to link this button, I don't know why it's red right now, but if I was to link this button to our data set as submit, then when I submit, this will add a new item with the value of the name being the value of this dropdown. So let's check that out. Okay, so I'm going to change this dropdown to Rupert, and I'm going to click submit. And you also have the option of adding a submit message. So if I go back to the editor and I go to this, I'm going to actually remove the sort that I added so that we see the newest items on top. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that sort. And then I'm going to go ahead and add, click over here, connect to data, and add a success message. And the success message basically tells you if the data has been successfully submitted to the data set. And the thing is that now my data set is read and write. So that means that this button will actually update the top item in the data set. But what I want to actually do is I want to add a new item. So I'm going to go ahead to settings and I'm going to change this to just write. And then I'm going to go and preview. I'm going to go ahead and preview the website. And I'm going to select Rupert and I'm going to click the button and my content has been submitted. Okay, and I'm going to go back to the editor and I'm going to link this back to my data set as read only. And now you will see that we have a new Rupert here on top. If I go into preview mode, and this Rupert doesn't have a city because we didn't add a city field. But basically what it did is it took this selection from the dropdown and it added it as an item to my collection. And you can also view that in the collection itself. So let's go over to the collection, content manager, collections, collection example. Click on it and it'll open your collection here inside of the editor. And you can see here that I have a new item with Rupert as first name, but no other fields. Okay, so if you submit partial data when you're creating a new item, then it'll only submit the data that you provided. Okay, and that is important to keep track of because this would be problematic for us because we only have partial data here. And that is something that we can control also using required fields and also just keeping track of providing all of the inputs that are necessary for creating our item. Another very important thing that we can do with buttons is pagination. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change this button to next page. Okay. And then I'm going to, it's still linked to the data set. So I'm going to go ahead and preview. And you'll see that when I click on this button, the data in our repeater will change. And this is basically the next 12 items in the repeater. And as I click, you'll see that it keeps on changing. And this is the proper way to manage and load data from a collection, not loading 50 or 100 items or 1,000 items at once, but 12 at a time, 10 at a time, 3 at a time, depending on how complex the repeater items are and how much time it's taking you to load. And I could easily add another button here that would go backwards. And then using those two buttons, we can go back and forth. It's also possible, instead of going to the next page, to do load more. So let's show you what load more does. If I go back to the editor and I change this button to be load more, so I'm going to go, instead of next page, this is going to be load more. Okay, and then I'm going to preview, and you'll see that at first I only have 12 items here ending in Juni. And then if I click the button and scroll down, you'll see that we have added another 12 items. Here, Juni's not the last anymore. Another 12 items right under that. So for some situations, this could be great. Um, Depends on how you want to present your data, and that's really a user experience thing and, you know, the designer's choice. So that is how you add a data set to your editor and connect it to a collection, and how you connect your elements on the Wix website to your data set. And we showed a repeater here, but lots of different elements in Wix can be connected to a data set. For example, even this drop down, instead of connecting it to provide data, you can connect the list items to the database. And you can choose a data set, for example data set, and the labels and values would be connected to first name. And then if I go into preview, then you'll see that the drop down list, I have to take it off from being whatever it was before. So let's change this. I'm just going to change this to choose, disconnect it, and go back into preview. You'll see that now this is actually a list of all the names from the dataset. Okay, so there are different ways to connect Wix elements to datasets, and this really can take your website to the next level and get you beyond just being a plain static content website that's all created using drag and drop elements on the editor. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. And in the future videos, I'll be showing you how to manipulate the data and the collections and the elements using Wix code or Velo. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.